All right, welcome everybody. Today we are going to show you how to make this block, the skewed pinwheel. If you're taking part in my 2020 Saturday sampler, you're going to make 2 of these blocks. This is a 5-inch block. So let's go over to the cutting mat and get started. Okay, so let's get started here. We're going to start making the skewed pinwheel simply because that's the supplies I actually have laying right here at this very moment. So you're going to have, you're going to need 4 of these little triangles. One of them says A1, A2, A3, A4. This one says B1, B2, B3, B4. When you cut them out of the paper originally, make sure you cut outside the dotted line. The dotted line is your final cut line. Cut out your template outside that. That's number 1. All right, so paper piecing is not difficult. Let's get started and I'll show you how easy it is. So we're going to take our template where it says B1, a piece of blue fabric goes on there. And I'm just going to grab, I've got a scrap pile of blue fabric here. I'm just going to grab a piece that's big enough to cover the little space that says B1 and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance outside. So that one is going to cover it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my paper over. This can be a lot of turning your paper right side up, wrong side up. Okay. So your first piece goes wrong side of fabric to wrong side of paper, and I just plop it right on there. Make sure I'm covering up that space, and I'm going to pin this on so it doesn't move on me. Our next piece of fabric that we're going to put on is our white. This is the gorgeous pastel almond. Look carefully, try to figure out which side is the right side and which side is the wrong side. All right, so let's go back over to this side. This piece is going to go, and I believe your camera's facing this way, B2. This piece needs to cover B2. It will. Very good. No matter how I put it, it will. All right. So now this seam line, this line here between B1 and B2 is where you're going to sew these 2 pieces of fabric together. Let me show you a trick to make sure your fabric is going to cover your paper. I am going to turn my cutting mat over to the ironing side because then I can pin straight into it. And yes, you will probably, if you have any small cutting mat ironing board right beside you, you're going to want it beside you. Otherwise, you're up and down to the ironing board a lot. Okay, so I'm going to take a pin and I am going to pin through the paper, through the blue fabric, straight down into my mat, my ironing mat, at the end point of the seam line, and then again at the other end point. Now I'm going to lift everything up all together, and this is flathead pins. This trick does not work if you have glass head pins or flower pins, anything. Flathead pins. Turn it over the other way up. Now we're looking at the right side of the blue fabric. Of course, we need to put right sides to right sides. We need to make sure that this is going to cover. Here, this little triangle you see here is what is hanging out there of the space we're going to cover. But we want to put this, for the moment, right side up, cover up that space, and I am going to stab through that, the pins, and make sure I keep them straight so my fabric lays flat. Take it over this side and make sure that my fabric stays flat. Again, back down, my pins are straight up, my fabric is flat. I am totally covering, although not quite out to the point. I need to be all the way out to the point, so now I need to move things a little bit. Didn't quite go as far as I needed it to go. All right, let's have it covering out to, aha, I'm going to have it put it that way on. Your fabric does not have to go straight to the grain when you're doing paper piecing. All right. Okay, so go through both and through everything here. And light colored fabrics, dark colored fabrics, doesn't matter, whichever. Sometimes it's easier to see. Now, I've got my pins. You're seeing the right side of both of these fabrics. Obviously, this is not the way you're going to sew it. But this is how you're going to mark where you're going to put this. There's my friction pen. There it is. All right. Take my little red friction pen. I'm going to mark a dot right there where the pin comes up. That's the pinhole. Okay, now I am going to turn this fabric. I'm going to make sure that the pin goes through the same spot, just going through the other way up of the fabric. So there it goes through the same spot, but through the other way up. And the same spot the other way up. Now you'll notice it's not covering this. And that's okay, because after you sew your seam and you fold it over, it will cover that. That is a way to make sure that you don't have to take out very many seams. My first few tries, sometimes the geometry confuses me, and I had to take things out until I figured out this trick. So now I'm in here. I'm going to turn this, keeping everything tight. I'm going to turn it up, paper side up. I am going to once again pin through everything I can pin through along this seam line. And I got that one in. I'm going to pull this pin. I'm going to come down here with it. Pin through there. And pull this pin out. We are now ready to sew our first seam. So let's go over to the sewing machine. All right, so now we're going to start sewing. Paper side up. We're going to be outside. We're going to start at the dotted line and going to sew down to the other dotted line. The dotted line is our final cut line. We want to make sure we sew out there. So here we go. If you sew on anything normally that is longer than a size 2 stitch, I highly recommend you reduce your stitch length to a size 2. That will make it easier to get the paper off, because it will put more holes in the paper. Get better perforation on the paper. So I do recommend you shorten your stitch length to a size 2. Okay, that seam is done, and now we're going to go back to the cutting mat. Okay, now back at the cutting mat, we're going to take out all of our pins. Yes, I use pins more than a lot of quilters, but this one really calls for it, in my opinion. Gotta hold things still. All right, so now we see the B1, we see the B2. B1 is this blue, B2 is this white. Let's see how we use this add a quarter ruler. It's awesome, I love it. So we're going to we started with B1, we added B2 onto it. That's the side we're going to fold up. Here's our nice sharp knife edge. We're going to fold the B2 along the seam up, nice sharp crease. Okay. Now this little ridge here, we're going to put that little ridge, and it's going to bump right up against the crease in the paper. Take your rotary cutter, you're trimming off at this point. There is your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now we're going to press this So let me turn the cutting mat over to the pressing side. I'm going to give it a good press this way, set the seam, and then press it open. Okay, so now there is B1 and B2 are on. B3 is another blue piece. Okay, let's find a blue piece that will fit that. I have lots of scraps laying here. Okay, it's a very small blue piece. And I am just going to plop that right on like that. I have much more than I need. Turn it over. Pin through all layers at the beginning and the end of the seam between B2 and B3. Push the pins all the way through. Mark where the pins go. Okay, you may not be able to see those red marks on camera, but I can see them. I'm going to pull off the blue off from one pin and put it back in, same hole the other way up. And then do the same thing with this one. Same hole the other way up. And now I'm going to pin from the paper side the edge of this seam. Pull that out. Come down here and pin at the point. Okay, and we are ready to go back to the sewing machine. Alright, and we are now going to sew this seam. Right here along the seam between B2 and B3. Seam is done. We are now ready to go back to the cutting mat. Okay, same thing we did on the last one. Take the pins out, lay the paper there, grab your add a quarter plus, the knife edge over, fold B3 back over B2. Now you are going to have this seam from B1, and it's totally, just tear the paper. Totally exactly what you need to do. Make a nice sharp crease, and bring the add a quarter inch ridge line on this beautiful add a quarter right up against the paper you have folded over, and trim everything off. Okay. All right, now we are starting to see the form that we need for our thing. We're going to turn over to the pressing side. Press the seam, set it, and then open. Give it a good press. Okay, and the last color we're putting on here, B4, is another piece of white. Okay, this is the right side of white. I want it to cover that. There it is. It covers that way. Okay. Turn it back over. Put my marker pins in for where the seam goes. all the way through everything, lift everything up. Make my marks where the pins go. Well, there was a problem right there because that one is not, okay, see, I just learned I'm going to have to move that. Because that one did not get caught by the pin. It's better to find it now than after you sew, though. Let me just iron out this mark, and we will try again. Let's turn it that way. Okay, let's try that again. Yes, that's going to work. Pin through. Pin through. Lift. Turn. Mark. Mark. And then turn it over. There. Turn the other one over. There. Again, make sure the pins are going through the same holes they came out of, just from the other side of the fabric. Don't be flipping the fabric from pin to pin. Okay. There we go. Okay, those pins hold things in place for now. Let's flat pin the seam. And we are ready to go back to the sewing machine. All right, let's sew this seam. All right, seam is sewn. Let's go back to the cutting mat. Okay, back at the cutting mat. Take our pins out. We're going to fold the B4 paper up over the B3 along the seam line. Okay. Nice sharp crease. Take the add a quarter edge, put it up against the fold. Let's get cut our seam allowance here. Okay. And that is our final interior seam. You notice there's a whole lot hanging out, but we have the basic colors going the way they need to go. Let's give it a good press. Set the seam, open it up, and give it a good press open. All right. Now let's turn it back over to the cutting mat side, and here is where we're going to find this portion of the block. Now I'm going to turn the add a quarter so the ridge is up, not down, because we're laying on flat paper. You could use a regular ruler as well. The add a quarter is right at hand, and it works just as well, but the ridge is up, not down. I'm going to lay this along the dotted line, which is our cut line. And we're going to shape this portion of the block. And sometimes going across that seam there, where all those seams meet, I have to cut a few times. Okay. And our little corners. All right, so now there is half of our block. I have the other half done right here. There's what our block's going to look like. You notice I still have the paper on. I am just going to put these together, and I'm going to sew along this seam line, putting them together. I am going to pin to hold things, because that's just the way I roll. I pin things. Things have a tendency to slip for me if I don't pin them, so I pin everything. Pin each corner, and then once in the middle. I may not actually pin through the paper. I may only pin through the here in the middle. Try to only pin through just the fabric because it gets pretty thick here. All right, and now back to the sewing machine. All right, and let's sew this seam. Now as we get to the center here where all of these seams come together, it can be kind of cranky, so slow down. You may need to give it just a bit of momentum. Okay, we are sewn. So let's cut our thread and go back to the cutting mat. Okay, back over here. I actually turn the pressing side up because that's what we're going to be doing next. Take the pins out. Trim up these little ends of threads here. There is our center of our block. What I'm going to do now, let's see, yes, it looks like it sewed pretty good. I'm going to take off only the paper that's in the seam allowance. I'm leaving all the rest of this on. Generally with paper piecing, you do leave on the paper until you have the block sewed in. The paper acts as a stabilizer. These are often bias edges, and who knows what weird stretch could happen. So the paper acts as a stabilizer to keep it from stretching. But we no longer need this paper that is inside the seam allowance, so I am taking that off. And then I'm going to press this seam. And you see how the paper is perforated nicely and it just tears right out. Okay. Now this has got a whole lot of points coming together in the middle. I am going to sort of do a twist in the middle. The way we've got them coming together, I can't do a proper twist, but I'm going to sort of twist to try kind of just smash it good there in the middle, to try to have it a little less bulky there in the middle. Smash it good. All right, now we're going to take our little white and red pieces, which per the instructions we have already cut to, these are 1.5 by 2.5, and I've already sewed them together, a pair of a red and a white end to end. So here's where we're going to do our partial seams. So right sides together, leaving the paper on the paper piece part. I want to match the red of this up to the white here, and it goes to the edge, and you'll notice it hangs off this edge, and that is exactly what we want to have happen on this first piece we put on here. Line up your edges. I'm going to sew it from the paper side, and I am going to pin. I am going to pin from this seam line to this corner. Now, a partial seam is exactly what it sounds like. You're not sewing the whole seam. When you sew, you do not have to start on the end and go to an end. We're going to start in the middle and go to the end on this first seam. Let's go to the sewing machine, and I'll show you what we're going to do. Okay, back at the sewing machine. We are not going to sew from edge to edge. We are going to sew this seam from middle to edge. All right, super short little seam. Here we go. Get my seam allowance to lay flat like I want it to here. Okay, this seam is complete. Back to the pressing mat. All right, back at the pressing mat. Take the pins out. There is the beginning of our border around this skewed pinwheel. Let's give it a good press. Okay, all right, now we're going to take the next little strip of red and white, match the white to the red. This one goes all the way across. Okay, so we're going to get this. I'm again still going to sew from the paper side just because the cloth catches the feed dogs better than the paper to keep it moving along. I am going to pin this because it looks like something slipped, so I need to do a little bit of easing because things are not wanting to fit super well, which means something slipped on me. I'll just ease it in and make it work. Could you do something with that alarm on my phone, please? Okay, I'm going to pin inside the paper there, and then it looks like I need to pin here also because that looks like where it slipped. We can fix it. Okay, all right, I think we're fixed. Back to the sewing machine. Okay, and this seam we're going to sew the way we always sew seams, full length of where the fabrics meet, edge to edge. And in case you're wondering, that squeak, it's the paper rubbing against my pressure foot. Okay, This seam is done. Cut my thread and go back to the pressing mat. Okay, back over here. Take my pins out. Cut my little thread at the beginning. Open it out, and voila, we're starting to see what the block actually looks like. Let's give it a good press. And the next two seams are done exactly the same way this seam here was done. So let's grab another strip, put it on here. Pin from the paper side. And you'll notice this paper's starting to tear out, and that's okay. Okay, and back to the machine. All right, seam number 3 around this block. Okay, back to the pressing mat. Okay, let's sew this seam. Okay, back to the pressing mat. All right. And we'll pull that one out too. Now we're going to give this one a little press. Okay, now open this out and we are going to finish this seam. I'm going to close this back down, pin to my corner here. We're going to go back to the machine and we're going to sew from here to the end. All right, here is the final seam on this block. We folded this back down. Make sure you start over top of the previous sewing to lock it in place. I'll hold my tails. Okay, that is the final seam. One last press, and this block is done. Okay, take the pin out. Make one final press here. The only thing left to do on this block is take off the paper, which I will do off camera. The paper just comes out nice and easily. One finished block. This is the skewed pinwheel. You'll make 2 of these. Thanks for watching us make the skewed pinwheel. The next video we're going to make the St. Louis Star. So like, subscribe, share, smash that notification button, and join me on the next video to make the St. Louis Star.